primary way to make decisions in Java is using the if-else statement or some form of the if-else statement. We're going to start in this lesson by looking at just the most simplest version, the plain if-else statement. Let's look at a general form of the if-else statement before we look at some specific examples. Let me put a little space in my comments here so you can see this better. You start off with the keyword if, followed by a relational expression. Number greater than 100, hours worked less than 40, something like that. Then, if the relational expression is true, then you have a set of statements, one or more, actually zero, but generally one or more statements that are executed if the relational expression is true. Then below that, you can have an optional else with a set of statements underneath it. Those set of statements, again, one or more statements usually, are executed if the relational expression is false. Notice that the set of statements in both parts of the if and the else are surrounded in curly braces. That's because if you have two or more statements, you have to put the statements in a block or surrounded by curly braces. But generally, it's a good idea to use the curly braces even if you're only going to have one statement. It's a lot easier to remember to just always use the set of curly braces than to remember that, well, I need it for two, but I don't have to use it for one. That just gets kind of confusing, especially for new programmers. So I just suggest that you always use the curly braces. Later I'll show you how to save a little bit of space with curly braces and not use up so much room. But for now, just remember that the set of statements underneath the if or the else need to be surrounded in curly braces because they're a block. So one more time, the if statement works by looking at a relational expression and either executing one set of statements if the expression is true, or another set of statements if the expression is false. So let's look at an example. We'll use the payroll example we've been talking about in previous lessons. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with a integer variable for hours worked. That will keep track of how many hours the user has worked or whoever's running the program. Then we're going to prompt the user to enter the hours worked and store it in the variable. We almost forgot to create a scanner object. We'll create the scanner object right after we've used the scanner object, although we'll put it before that. We'll do a next int right here. And let's come back up. We'll put it right here. Then we'll just assume that the rate that this person gets paid is $25. We could have input for that also, but we'll just leave it like that to make the program just a little bit easier. And then we'll also create a variable, let's call it gross pay. That's going to store their gross pay. So here's how we compute the gross pay. We write if hours worked is greater than 40, and inside that block we write pay is equal to 40 times rate times the hours worked minus 40. Here we're going to get the overtime part times the rate times 1.5. I believe I have all my parentheses covered. And then close that off. And then we'll write else, open the block, and then write pay is equal to hours worked times rate, since we don't have to do anything else for just regular time. Close off the block, and then write system out print line. And I see that I used my variable wrong, so I'll go fix that real quick. Right here, and again right here. So that all looks correct. If it's not, we'll fix it in the compile part. So let's save it. Then let's compile the program. So this is Java C, chap 8, part 3.java. And then Java chap 8, part 3 to run it. Here the hours worked, let's do 45. And clearly that's not correct. That times should be a plus. Do it again. Recompile. Run it again. 45. That looks a lot better. So what happened was when we type in 45, the if statement looks at the hours worked value, which is 45, and if that's greater than 40, which it is, then it computes gross pay using that statement. Otherwise, let's run the else part now. We'll just run it again. Let's say 35, then the gross pay is $8.75. So if hours worked is not greater than 40, if it's 40 or less, then this expression is false and the program skips to this statement to execute. That's how the simple if-else works. Now, let me show you a little thing that'll save a little bit of time and trouble with your programming. We're always dropping down to start a new block on a new line. And while that is certainly acceptable, it also uses a lot of extra space in our programs. So far, that hasn't been a problem because our programs have been fairly short. But they're going to get longer, and we're going to want to save space. So a common way to save space is to put the opening curly brace of a new block on the same line with the trigger for that block, such as the if statement, which triggers this block, or the else statement, which triggers this block. I only save 2 lines, but in the long run, we're talking many lines and not just 2. It's a common style to use, and I would encourage you to use it if you're comfortable with it. If you're not, it's perfectly reasonable to start the block on a new line. Programming styles, as long as you're consistent, are really up to you. You pick the programming style that you like. What I suggest, though, is that you're always consistent because it's hard to read a program, or harder to read a program, where the writer uses an inconsistent style, where they appear in one place and then start it on the next line in another place and go back and forth indiscriminately. This makes it harder to read the program. As I like to say, pick a style and stick with it, whatever that style is. So that's a review of the simple if-else statement. And in the next lesson, we're going to look at more complex if-else statements.